Surely there is a mine for silver and a place for gold to refine. Iron is taken out of the earth and copper is smelted from stone ore. Man puts an end to darkness by bringing in the light and searches out the farthest limit, rock buried in gloom and deep shadow. He breaks open shafts in a valley far away from anyone, in places forgotten by the foot. They dangle far away from men and swing to and fro. As for the earth, out of it comes bread, but underneath it is turned over as fire. Its stones are the bed of sapphires. It holds dust of gold. That deep path no bird of prey knows, and the falcon's eye has not seen it. The proud beasts have not trodden it. The lion has not passed over it. Man puts his hand to the flinty rock and overturns mountains by the roots. He cuts out channels in the rocks, and his eye sees every precious thing. He dams up the streams so they do not flow, and the thing that is hidden, he brings out to light. But where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its worth, and it is not found in the land of the living. The deep says, "It is not in me." The sea says, "It is not with me." It cannot be bought for gold, and silver cannot be weighed as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire. Gold and crystal cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or of crystal. The price of wisdom is above pearls. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot equal it, nor can it be valued in pure gold. Where then does wisdom come? And where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living, and concealed from the birds of the air. Destruction and death say, "We have heard a rumor of it with our ears." God understands the way to it, and he knows its place. For he sees the end of everything in the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he gave the wind its weight and pressure and pointed the waters by measure, when he made a limit for the rain and a way for the thunderbolt, then he saw it and declared it. He established it and searched it out. And he said to man, "The awe of God is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding."
Good morning, fine people. I gotta stop this. Yeah, jump in. Let me see here. I will go ahead. I'll talk here a little bit, allow people to get in here. I saw on Twitter, and Paul had the conversation here. I loved that conversation last week. I was working, so I couldn't participate in it live. But I love the conversation he had with all the folks on kind of the emergent church. And I agree that was it was a really really good conversation. I think it unpacked a lot of what was been going on that we all kind of went through as we were in the United States, particularly participating in church at different levels, watching what's going on, kind of as modernity was coming to its crashing end and all these other things were rushing in and the church was responding to it. I think the church and how we were doing things was needs to also look in the mirror. What role did we play? Wait a minute. What role did we play in all of this? And I did want to point, and this whole idea of the death of the conversion style story. And I think that's something that I've been we've all been talking about a little bit, but I think putting a fine point on that I think is really important. Now, I would say, Paul, I would say that he gave a fairly reformed Calvinistic caricature of Methodists and used them as his main foil. And I would just say with respect to that. Now, I grew up in the mainline United Methodist Church, so there absolutely were the Wesley holiness movements, which were, you know, just simple terms. I get it, guys. Can you just grant me a little grace here? Definitely more of a Pentecostal sort of a Holy Spirit sort of a movement. And while I certainly was aware of those, I went to United Methodist churches grew up in Nebraska. So I went to churches in Nebraska, went to multiple churches in Nebraska as I grew up. And then when I got married and went to a different one because I was in a different part of town. I then also went to Methodist churches in Kansas and Missouri. So what I'm speaking to, but I think it pretty much was the Methodist mainline, is that it wasn't a Billy Sunday altar call sort of a thing. That's not what the Methodist Church was. Now, certainly, John Wesley was absolutely a charismatic preacher. Make no mistake about that. And we certainly had others. Let's talk about our Billy Sundays and Jonathan Edwards. We had all sorts of people from different sorts of frames, but the um, the Methodist church that I grew up in, we had no altar calls. We had none. We had a very defined liturgy. The Methodist hymnal was at the forefront of kind of our theology and what our services were about. It was very buttoned up. Like it was a very buttoned up thing. And I definitely heard growing up. So, and I've said this, probably people have heard me talk about this all the time. What I got from the pulpit as a young man, I was baptized in the Methodist church. I went through confirmation when I was 13. What I did get, the message I got was God's love for us, and then the call to personal holiness, right? And Paul, the caricature you gave, which is we're running around, we're all perfect now, so we don't have sin. That was not the message any one of us got in the pews. The call to personal holiness was this lifelong, the understanding that the response to God's love is to live a holy life. And we were called to be holy, to practice the gospel virtues. And this was going to be a lifelong process. And while, yes, Wesley has, and it felt a lot more like theosis. Now, I know from a technical standpoint, you have entire sanctification or perfectionism or so on and so forth. But how that played out in the pews, was we definitely didn't think we were perfect. Okay. But there definitely was this call that you were supposed to respond to God's love and live a holy life, which I mean, quite frankly, I have not changed that opinion coming in the Orthodox Church or any other place I went. And so it definitely was not Pentecostal by any stretch of the imagination. So, if you look at Methodists from the turn of the century, everything else, I mean, we were leading the charge on the prohibition and everything else. Like, it was a very buttoned up, for the most part, what I would call the larger mainline Methodist church. Now, Methodism had, I mean, if you would look at, it's changing drastically now. I mean, Methodist was the largest denomination by far in America, just dwarfed all their other denominations. Through that time. So make no mistake about it. But I'm gonna push back against your Reformed caricature of Methodist, Paul. Grant me that. But I do think that I think what Sam pointed out, that he felt like there was this, and I think it certainly came in the emergent movement, but there were definitely people that played this out, is I think this move to try and get people to the emotional moment and the Hollywood tricks to try and create an emotional response and get someone into a call to action. I will just tell on myself. Okay. It was very obvious to me, and in the purest sense, I was trying to get people, when I was preaching or teaching, there was some heartfelt thing where I was trying to get some call to action. And generally my call to action, what I hoped to do, was to hopefully share the truth, but to get you out of the pew or out of the seat or out of being a term that was called the casual Christian, and into the life, like to get you into action, to actually start doing it, right? To become a disciple, to drop your net and of your life and go follow Jesus. So that was the call to action. And as I was preparing a certain message, I would think about a song that I thought maybe had a powerful kind of way that might bring the message home. Um, as I look at this now, and I've had a more chance to look at that, so there I'm telling on myself because I wasn't consciously trying to do something wrong. But I think as you look at the seeker, but even if you see in certain emergence and with the altar call, there is this technique that you can use to try and invoke an emotional reaction in someone to get them to make the move, right? And a lot of it is around soundtrack, music. Like there are a lot of, you can see it particularly in megas. And by the way, I saw this in Seeker, but I also saw it in emergent movements too. That pastor's up there giving his message, and then all of a sudden he's getting to the money moment, to the call to action. And that could be a call to action to come up for the altar call. Or it could be the call to action to get you into the discipleship program. So while the pastor's kind of getting ready to hit the ending, all of a sudden the worship leader will come behind with his strat and he'll start playing heavenly chords, very soft, right behind the pastor. And that's a technique. Like it's a Hollywood technique, it's a soundtrack technique. And ultimately there would be some sort of getting you to move, trying to get you. And so now that you see this, like when you watch this, like if you want to watch certain people, now once you see it, you can't unsee it. And behind all the speaking soft or whatever, and you've got the soundtrack playing behind you, and it's like, are you feeling that call right now? Are you feeling something? Is God speaking to you? Come up to the altar. Or we have people back there, go sign up. Are you being called to go to our discipleship, our 12-week discipleship class? If God's calling you, if you're feeling it in your heart, go do that. Now, a lot of those things are good because, ultimately, if I can get you to sign up for the 12-week discipleship class, 20% are going to actually end up going deeper and potentially sticking with it, or some number, some small number. It's not going to be that many. A lot of people will start, very few will finish. You're going to have a very small group of people that are going to actually come out of the pew or come out of casual Christianity or come out of the seat and actually live the life. But that's your whole goal, right? So that's your whole goal. But I do think when Sam talked about, I think this idea of using these emotional techniques to try and get people into this singular conversion moment, I think that's done. And I have Gen Z kids, and I think that you started to see that. So why were emergents responding to seekers? Although I'm not excusing emergents from using the techniques, because there's been plenty of emergents who use the techniques. I think that ultimately people are realizing that, yeah, that doesn't work. The momentary emotional thing will wear off. Now, to be fair to people like Billy Graham, I think the movements I was a part of, and I can even go back to my Methodist church. Like Billy Graham knew, I'm going to get a bunch of people emotionally. I'm going to get people to come forward for the altar call. But I had better do the groundwork ahead of time to get churches that would come up, because I know that that's a momentary thing. And we've got to get them into relationship, into a community where they'll take over from there and hopefully get someone into discipleship and so on and so forth. So I do want to steel man that. I think a lot of people understand that those windows open and those emotional responses go away. They are extremely fleeting, because even the most well-intentioned person who comes after a deconstruction and everything else is going to try and enter into life, and it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy, and you're going to feel really close to God. Sometimes he's going to feel like he's not here. Where's God? Read the Psalms. But I do think that when I look at millennials, definitely were speaking to, they use the word authenticity, and this makes people mad, but that's a word that they used. And I think that they really were starting. Gen Z was absolutely that. Millennials really pushed that. Uh, I'm sorry, Gen X did that. Millennials, and then Gen Z is, man, they've gone through COVID lockdowns. I've got Gen Zs. They've gone through COVID lock. They've been through so much stuff. They're just done with. They're done with those sorts of things. So I do think that we're entering into a phase where those old techniques are not going to be at the forefront. And I think people are looking, and that's why I think you see people are looking for um, realizing that we're going to have to. That people are looking for something deeper. Um, Nathan Jacobs used the word thinness. I've used the thinness of some of that. What I would call technique Christianity, the ability to whip up an emotion in the moment. I think that absolutely is dead, and we're in it, and we're in a new place. I do want to say, oh gosh, I forgot to put in the invite. I'll do this. I do want to say to Steelman though, and I think it's important to say this. Most of the people that are doing that and have done that have sincere hearts about it. They want people. They know if they can get them to move to take the action, that once they're in, that hopefully that they can call them deeper and deeper into the life. And so I think um, a lot of people have their heart. Some of them intentionally are using the technique. I think most of them don't even realize that they're using the technique. But I think we've seen with the collapse of the church and so on and so forth, and people not really living the life. Their lives don't look that much different than their neighbors, and so on and so forth. I think when I would say that when I was part of this house church planning movement, when I would say that it wasn't working, that's the sort of stuff that I was thinking about. So, um, which I think then leads into kind of what we're doing here. And you would think about what's happening in the TLC as we're building relationships and we're trying to have conversations that go over an extended period of time. Me, like one of the things I loved about this is I wasn't really exposed to Unitarianism. I got to talk to Sam. I was listening to him. I was trying to figure out. And I remember I called him into a BOM voice chat because I thought I'd figured out. I was like, okay, this is how you see the incarnation, and then this is what happened at the theophany or Jesus' baptism. This is what you saw on Transfiguration, and then ultimately Jesus received his divinization after his death and resurrection. He's like, yeah, absolutely, you got it. I was like, oh, awesome. I can map on to what he's doing there. So I think there's something about this that is um, deeper. I think we are starting to see, and I think people are realizing that there's this longer process. Um, and so, I think, but this isn't a new concept. I read a book in like the 2000, I think it came out 9, 10, 11, something like that, called Slow Evangelism. And basically it talked about that, trying to go out and knock on your neighbor's doors and be bullhorn guy, which by the way, bullhorn guy has his place. Bullhorn guy, some bullhorn guys were called to be bullhorn guys. But ultimately, the evangelism that really happened in your life that is most effective is long evangelism, the friends you have over a long period of time, the people that you get to know, that if hopefully they see that how your faith is working out in your life and how you maybe handle adversities, whatever, those sorts of things, that something happens in their life. Generally, it's something traumatic that then they'll ask you the layup question, which is, well, how do you do that? Like, I want to know, right? Whatever that is. And then, like, at that point, it's not evangelizing. You're just telling people your story, and then you invite them to church or whatever you end up doing. So, um, yeah. So, McMo, jump in. Come on, guys. At PVK, let's kick this around. We had this. No, so again, like I just said, Bullhorn guy needs to be Bullhorn guy, right? Like I get it. Like some people are called to be Bullhorn guy, and it doesn't mean that people aren't out there preaching and so on and so forth. I mean, we can have a Billy Sunday who, self-proclaimed world record leader in conversions or so on and so forth. But you know, I do think that I think we can see by the church numbers, people are responding to that. That people are looking for something that I think they're looking for communities, depth. And by the way, that can play out in the Protestant. I'm not saying Orthodox or this, that, the other, McMo, right? You know, I'm not saying that. Like, I do think that what we're seeing is this hunger for. We're past the moment of trying to just get that emotional response. And I think, and that was part of a lot of what the emergent movement was trying to do was to go deeper, right? And I think Paul mentioned in his video maybe last week, calling them the Theo Bros or some other things. I think that was the start of what some of the emergent movement was trying to do. Although the emergent movement was big, there were lots of different flavors of emergent movements. Let's go here. Man, no one wants to come in and talk about this. All right. One of the this is an aside. So for those of you that were Methodist or lived within the Methodist movement and so on and so forth, another thing that I think is really interesting about Methodism, since we'll come back to that, trying to unpack why the Methodist movement was, and I'm talking about the United Methodist Church, not the personal holiness movement, the main United Methodist Church in the United States. And there were some structures of why the governance happened that way, but how it so radically was overtaken by the progressive ideology in the early 2000s. I think that's also a fascinating thing. All right. Well, McMo, you're probably working. Anybody else want to jump in? Here we go. PVK. I got him. I got him to jump in.
I got to empty the dishwasher.
That's okay. So again, I had to tell you, I had to push back on your Reformed shots at the Methodist, Paul.
Oh, I love the Methodist. Somebody said in the stream that when Methodism hit, it's hard for people to realize today, but when Methodism hit, it was just a revelation. It just whooshed all over the world. And, it's the same. You can look at why Methodism whooshed, because it's almost always the sacrificial, consecrated, extreme, rigorous. Methodism was all of that. It really was. And the difficulty is that as you continue to expand it and scale it, it becomes religion for the wobbly and the normies, and it becomes nominal, and it becomes civilizational, and it sort of loses its edge. It loses its sheen. And I was reading a piece by an Orthodox priest today who was basically saying, even though in our little corner where orthodoxy is sort of whooshing is in the eye of the beholder, because he was saying, American Orthodoxy continues to be majority immigrants and their children, and it's part of its allure is that it is strange and novel, and then for some cutting edge. And so and Orthodox or Methodism was all that. When you read, if you read the Wesleys, you read a lot of early Methodist literature, they scared a lot of Christians because they were so serious. And most of the stuff that we're doing today, Methodism was all about small groups. Estuary is basically a small group thing. Methodism was about, and Methodism didn't invent that. Small groups have always been in the church. So right. Methodism just, grabbed its moment and saved a generation. And I don't think there's no shame in having, Calvinism had the same thing. I mean, all these movements that we have today, they had their moment where they were the radicals and the cutting edge, and the consecrated, the serious, the rigorous took that form and ran with it and inspired the church and revived the church. And so, no, I didn't. In no way did I want to dump on the poor Methodist.
And Wesley
today, because what's happened to, the United Methodist Church, it's just terrible.
It's really sad. I mean, there is a, Methodists, like the Episcopalians too, like they were on the very cutting edge of moving hard into this. Now, part of it, as a synod guy, Paul, part of it was the weird way in which our power structures were in the Methodist Synod and how things worked. The powerful churches could grab more control, and the powerful churches tended to be the big churches in cities. So what does that end up doing? We all kind of understand kind of where that's at. And Wesley never left it. He didn't want to leave the Anglicans, but he was trying to ordain people, and they wouldn't ordain him, and he knew he had this new world. And so, he was trying to, effectively he got kicked out. And so he was a real presence, Eucharist, and the thing that I always thought about, and no one ever told me this, Paul, but I had this natural intuition growing up in Methodism. The analogy I made is it's methodical. Because we heard about Asbury and these holiness movements and everything else, but like we were baptized as babies. We had this very structured thing we did. Confirmation when you're 13 was this whole year-long process. We took tests, Paul. Like we had to actually pass the test, and the disciple leader, we had to do this. And then, to our folks who said our baptisms weren't sufficient, well, at 13, we had to then go in front of the church, and that's where we made our confession. And then we were brought in as members of the Methodist Church, and we got our little card. Like there was a very methodical way with which they catechized everyone through. And so it was, again, methodical. It was methodical. And so like when you talked about, which I think is very interesting, which is the heart of what hit Alex, when Sam started talking about it, I had the same reaction, Paul, because I think it is a very crystallized thing that I think we're moving past trying to generate the Billy Sunday moment. I think where we're at, and you start talking about all the information we have, like this time of where we're at, I think people understand the Hollywood techniques. Like once I started to see it, and then I saw, I was doing it. Now, whenever you see the pastor come up and then they play the heavenly chords behind the pastor while he's doing the call to action, I'm like, that's a Hollywood technique. And then ask, are you feeling it now? Is God talking to you? Well, yeah, he's talking to you because you've got the soundtrack getting you feeling all good about it.
Well, and it's how do we sort that out, right? Because there's just emotions that are kind of like just saccharine sweet. But then when you're in love with your beloved, there's tons of emotions there as well. So, I mean, all of us who are married understand the complication of that.
Right.
Yeah, it's, and there've been so many studies. I mean, if you look at Amy Semper McPherson, who really took, she was in Hollywood. She had theatrics, and it was miracles and signs and wonders. But in many ways, if you look at, let's say, ancient temples, in some ways, the psychotechnology of Orthodox, of really beautiful Orthodox and Catholic and Protestant churches, those are psychotechnologies of awe. And when Father Josiah Trenum, talks about the fact that, he was a Presbyterian, and then he went to an Orthodox, or his brother, I don't remember him or his brother, went to an Orthodox church, and he's like, God is really here, just like the Vikings who went down to Constantinople. Emotions are always a part of it, but I think part of, in our age of deep, certain things have been so played so often, not just by churches, but by marketers and commercials, we are a deeply cynical culture around certain forms of selling. And I mean, those forms of selling were used by Billy Graham, were used by the Methodists, were usually, innovated in many ways by the churches, and they sold. But again, like I said in the video, it's also that our storytelling styles, once the ideal, so I'm preaching on the Sermon on the Plain this week, once the ideal is sort of set up there for this is what a Christian conversion looks like, everyone just sort of understands their stories in that frame. And then now that frame is sort of being taken apart, people are going to have different storytelling structures for their conversion story. And it's absolutely fine. And like, Phlebas and others have noted, the Christian Reformed Church, what you described, Lance, for the Christian Reformed Church was very, very similar, where you're baptized as an infant. Usually in your teenage years, you would go for profession of faith. You'd be quizzed on the catechism because you were taking catechism classes all the way up to there. But then suddenly when Christian Reformed people met Methodists out there in the evangelical world, and all the Methodists were like, well, this was the moment that I became a Christian. All the Christian Reformed kids are like, am I a Christian? I've always been a Christian. What do you mean a Christian? And so it's just back and forth on these things. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that liturgy is inevitable. Structure is inevitable. We're going to find patterns, and God uses those patterns to bless his people. There's nothing wrong with it.
Well, and it's interesting. I grew up low church Methodist, so Nazarene. And so it's interesting to see and both sides kind of can sometimes look over the fence at the other, low church versus high church, or pietistic versus structural. And so I do see movements kind of back and forth between those things. Like the structure is important, but it can also kind of become dead. And then there's these movements like John Wesley to ask again, what is the life in this? And I mentioned marriage earlier. The same things happens in marriage. We can have the structure, but without the life, it can kind of seep out.
Yeah. Paul, so Mandy, I shared a couple times, and I want to repeat that I meant that. The sincerity, I was someone who, the critique I'm making, I was someone who you tried to use that technique out of a sincere place to hopefully call someone into action, right? To call them into really, if you would hear what I was, and it's probably not where I wrote this book called Ask, Seek, Knock, and I shared it in my church groups we were using. My call was to try to get people out of the seats and out of the just showing up into like actually doing the life, like to living it. And so, Mandy, I would say that a lot of sincerity comes from people who are, and again, some people know they're using the technique. Other people don't know they're using the technique. It's just part of what the milieu that you've come up in. But Paul, like you had a tweet, I think a couple of days ago, where you talked about this pastor was getting ready to do a baptism, and then the guy starts saying some crazy stuff, right, in the baptismal font, and he goes, whoa, let's slow down here, because and so I'm going to tell on myself. I had a young guy that I've been working with in 12-step recovery, whatever. He comes to me after a meeting, and we'd talked for probably about 4 or 5 months, but there was no formal catechesis. And he just says, well, what happens that I believe? And then I said what Peter said. Well, the same thing in Acts. Well, you confess from out, we'll baptize you and everything else. He's like, can we do that now? We went down to a swimming pool and I did a baptism, right? Now, that was okay in my world, right? Now, again, that was done with all sincerity and love and everything else. But there is some wisdom, I think, Paul, and I've been making the case. And so Protestants, you would say that like the loss of the vocational and the mainline and I felt like in Methodist, my big Methodist church, Paul, but I think the same thing would have happened for you, was that there was this understanding that this is kind of a hard, long process, and you kind of work with people. They come to, like, even a new person, come to a membership class for a little bit, hang out. This is what we're going to do and believe. You cool with that? Like, I think there is, it doesn't have to be 2 or 3 years or anything like that, but there's something about making sure that someone really knows what they're getting into, if that makes sense, right? Giving them some time. And I don't think they're going to go to hell just because they weren't baptized before they died. So I don't think there needs to be this rush. That's my opinion. But I know some people maybe not disagree with that. But I think we're losing, and I think that's what you're pointing at, Paul, and I think that's what Sam was. I think there's some wisdom in some depth in bringing people into the church. I don't know.
We just had Sunday after church, we had a special council meeting because we've got people who've been at church a while and we need to make them members. And so we're going to have 3 adult baptisms, and which for the Christian Reformed Church is a big deal, because the Christian Reformed Church, like many traditional churches, has sort of lived on, having children and making them. So we've got 3 adult baptisms, and then 1 person coming in from another church. So that's a profession of faith. And, all of them, I had another couple come in, church shoppers on Sunday, and this is their second time through. So, when church shoppers come through a second time, oh, we're still on the list. And I talked to them and I said, I have no problem with someone coming and participating for a year before they actually become official members, because I want you to stick. I want you to take a good look. I want you to be at home, and to sort of ring in the emergent church conversation. I mean, that was a big element of the emergent church thing, where you belong before you believe. And so, and again, you look at orthodoxy and long periods of catechesis. I mean, being in a church for a year or 2 before actually becoming members of the church, that's functionally catechesis. And so, it's a very metagelical moment where you've got a former Methodist here, pushing back on some of my prodding of the Methodism, but you're Orthodox now. And, so I think this is actually how the body of Christ has always worked. We have many of the letters of Paul, but was James and that epistle that Luther called of straw, was he a Judaizer? We have Augustine from the Catholic Church, but the Donatists were sort of the rigorous among them in the wake of the persecutions and the defections of priests. And so innovation and revival comes into the church, and it's a continual churn whereby the gifts that God has distributed throughout his church can come to bless more and more portions of the church. And that's, part of the reason why I celebrate this ortho moment. It looks big from our point of view, might be small from other points of view, but I think God continues to revive his church and strengthen his church and equip his church to reach each generation and different cultures and nations. So I think it's all the work of the church.
You're muted.
Lance, you're muted. Yeah.
I always think it's interesting that, particularly if you're new, like if you grew up in a secular home or whatever, and there are a lot of, which is shocking to me, there are a lot of people that really had no idea what Christian people thought or talked about or whatever, are new to that or whatever. So if you're oh gosh, I lost what I was going to say when I got dropped off there. Anyway. What I was going to say, in 12-step groups, so the 12 steps says having had a spiritual awakening is the result of these steps. what they realize is you have to go through you're going to go through this process, and really what the process is a repentance process, right? You're going to go through this process, and then ultimately out of that, what's going to happen is you're going to then have you're gonna have an understanding and awareness, and your belief is built like after that. And so one of the things about and it's okay to get the cart before the horse, but sometimes if we rush too quickly, how can you believe or have faith before you actually start practicing these things and start living the life? Because the faith kind of gets born out of the life that you're living, and then it's showing up and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a interesting thing. It looks like someone wants to criticize me, and I don't want to run away from criticism. Prester John said, I would love to know if PVK saw the PBS News report, but of course Lance didn't highlight or ask the comment to him. Go figure.
Well, the Donk posted this. It was on the Dispatch, actually. I don't know. PBS had a piece. I mean, what's interesting is that on one hand, there's clearly something going on in terms of orthodoxy right now. There's no question about that. But then again, the Peugeot question of where do you stand? So if you stand in the corner and you see all of this, new converts and people from other traditions having their spiritual life, quickened in orthodoxy, it's like, wow, this is a big deal. But maybe if you look at the entire, and this is no secret, it was an Orthodox priest that wrote that piece in the Dispatch that John Van Donk shared, and the Orthodox on YouTube have been very open about the fact that, compared to something like the Methodist Church in America, the Orthodox are tiny. There's a great video by Ready to Harvest on McDonald's size reach in churches in America. And they're like Catholic, PCUSA, United Methodist Church, Southern Baptist, or not even Southern Baptist. Southern Baptist still is fairly regional. They're almost there. Assemblies of God, of course, is enormous, but the Orthodox Church in America is tiny and fragmented in many ways, and so there's no shame in that. It's just the way it is. So I just I don't know. I praise God for the one sheep that gets found and brought in. If that's through the Orthodox, I'll celebrate it. So,
well, and it kind of meets our moment right now. Like my nephew is an Orthodox catechumen. Our family is church shopping right now. We brought him to the Orthodox Church. We introduced him. It's meeting a need for where he was at. And it does tie into that deeper history that I was missing in my low church context. But yet I'm not joining. So it's just this interesting mix, and it will continue to grow. It has legs. That movement is going to keep growing, but it will encounter some of the headwinds eventually that other churches have faced.
Lance, you're highlighting other people's comments criticizing you when you won't even talk to me so I can criticize you. I feel like
you're here. Let me have it. Let me have it, Alan.
No. But I did want to make the point about yeah, we have the heaven chords and we got the green screen, the smoke machine, whatever you want to call it. But they've got incense and they've got chanting and they've got, murals on the walls. I've been to, a service. Guess what? Those are also designed to be the emotional, get you if you go to a cult, I'm not comparing Eastern Orthodox to a cult, but you go to any place that's there to, change your belief system. You go to Scientology, whatever, they're going to do long staring into your eye. They're not just going to use a smoke machine and heaven chords. They're going to use long waiting. There are all sorts of techniques. So incense is also, you could say, no, we're doing that because in Revelation it says the prayers of the saints are like incense unto God. And but it also is serving another purpose. So, I don't think it's fair to be no, when they do it, it's, it's just emotional manipulation. But when we do it, it's because it's what God told us to do, it's so, it's not exactly, and I like it. I like sitting in an Eastern Orthodox service and looking at the murals and smelling the incense and hearing the chanting of the prayers. It's nice. You could call it hypnosis. You could call it relaxation. You could call it brainwashing. You could call it communion with God, like whatever. But they're there for a reason. And we're not just like brains floating in a vat who are like, when you make the correct argument, I will believe in Jesus. So yeah, I just wanted to like point out, like, yeah, whether it's heaven chords on a keytar, and a green screen, or it's incense in a Catholic church or murals in an Eastern Orthodox church. I mean, literally the Catholics like just stare at a piece of bread, the Eucharist, the body of Christ, which is also just a piece of bread, which is also the body of Christ. It's like, if that isn't also a technique, I don't know what is, yes, you could say it. So, yeah. So all these things are just melded together, and it's hard to draw like strong lines of like, this is manipulation, but this is following the word of God.
So there's a passage of scripture that I don't see people talking about, which is kind of, to me, is very interesting. And I think it overlaps with what you're saying, Alan, about the validity of this, where in 2 Kings, there's a story where the prophet Elisha is brought in to prophesy, and he doesn't have anything to say. So he says, bring a musician in. They bring a guy in with a lyre. He starts riffing. Like the guy just starts playing a couple of bars, and the prophet just like lets the music kind of get to him. And then he just freestyles prophecy. And that's in the Bible. It's not a hypothetical, can God use these sort of things? It's like straight up in scripture that this is how the prophet Elisha one time communicated God's desires for his people, right? So it doesn't seem ridiculous to me at all that we would use this manipulation, for lack of a better term.
Yeah,
I would say kind of these are tools of formation, but yeah, just I think like the 12 steps were kind of like a way that people could gain some footing in a spiritual formation, and then they start to take the action, and then the mind follows and all that stuff. But you'd be surprised at how many people can't take the steps or won't take the steps because they don't already feel like they possess a belief of some sort, and so they'll block themselves from being able to seek any further. And it's like, that's putting the cart before the horse. Like, let's just kind of like do some house cleaning, clear out the garbage, clean out the temple, and maybe we'll find some books in here. I think that's kind of what the steps are like. And but I was thinking about all of this different kinds of stuff. Like, this is so interesting. I had a conversation last night with this lady, Melly, and it was the most incredible and grounding conversation I think I've had in life. And so I'm sharing that with you guys because I'm hoping that everybody gets an opportunity to hear her story. It's really incredible, and I think unique, but probably not historically unique. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about the other night, Ann and I were cooking dinner, and she was reading to me all these different kinds of traditions, so-called Christian traditions that have cropped up throughout the last century or so. And I was thinking about how a lot of it is rooted in somebody's particular revelation, and then that gets carried and kind of like codified in a sense, and try to maybe methodize how to do this. And a lot of that, I was thinking about how when PVK talked about in the past about how, like in the West, as we move further out into the frontier, Bibles are heavy to carry. So, like when that happens, you have all sorts of innovative ideas and changes that start to take place because of people. I think it's rooted in desperation, not in actual malevolence or anything like that. It's like people are trying to grasp for a story to be inside of. And I think Christian Baxter's pronouncing that the internet has dissolved the walls of the church. It's just another iteration of the American pioneer spirit, that Bibles are very heavy to carry. And who knows how you want to kind of map that, whether it's like my own ideas make it hard for me to or impossible to adhere to anybody because I have a Protestant spirit and don't know it. And innovation takes place, and yeah, it's interesting. It's because if you just like actually spend time with people before, this was a lot easier for me before I ever became Christian, by the way. So before I ever became a Christian, like I didn't really have any kind of like disgust sensitivity around what people believed other than Christians themselves as a whole. So, but as I become Christian, I become more and more leery and like mook or knightish and protective, and egotism wants to step in and kind of like try to do its job. It's interesting. And I think God, Christ, the Father, all of that, if there's one thing that I think I can really rely on, is looking at the pattern that God, the greatest storyteller ever was, is the ultimate frame breaker. And that's very comforting to me and also terrifying. So I just wanted to share that. I think you guys are doing a great job. And with that, I'll pass.
Nope.
Great stuff, Chad.
Disappeared. I was even wondering about some of Chad's, what his opinions would be on some of these ideas about manipulation, because I think even, and I mean in a positive way, I even think the 12 steps is an example of that. It's like how we arbitrarily focus on things that we wouldn't necessarily focus on. So the Protestants would do this by saying, we're going through a book of the Bible exegetically, and so we have to talk about money because Jesus is talking about money, so we're forced to do this, right? The liturgy would do that as well, where liturgically it would be like, I don't know if you guys feel sad today, but today is a fast day. So you're going to lament, you're going to do all these things because that's, even if you don't feel it, you're going to work yourself up to it. And I think of things like, I don't know, before, like doing plays or even in sports, when people would work themselves up in order to do a thing that they think is valuable. Even if you don't feel that way immediately, you see the value in the thing you're about to do. So that role of the artificial, but seeing that as kind of a positive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's super normal. You know, like, yeah, have you ever, when you play sports as a kid, you don't always want to go, if you're in the locker room and you're like yawning and like, it's the championship game, but I have a test tomorrow. People don't like that. People are putting on face paint. People are doing all these tribal rituals. I don't know if you've heard of Mark of the Warrior, but people will on your like open skin slap you, and then it leaves a red imprint. So it's like, I've got the red imprint Mark of the Warrior, and that'll go away in 24 hours. But yeah, so people do that all the time, and it's like not only important but necessary. I mean, what do you think we do when we're praying? Of like, I don't know. I don't always want to get down and pray, but it's like I'm going to orient myself towards God and around His Word, and and I'm also going to top down, God, tell me what to do. Bottom up, this is what I want. God, please tell me. Please open these doors if it's your will. So yeah. I mean, I definitely think we need the top down. Like, you don't want to fast, but you want to go to Golden Corral and stuff your face because you're a little piggy, but you're going to fast today and you're going to wear, sackcloth and put ashes on your head because, the world is filled with troubles and bad things. And you need to remember that.
And that influence can still be rejected too. There was this book that came out like 2010-ish called A Year of Living Biblically, where this guy, A.J. Jacobs, he just decides, I'm going to follow every single rule in the Bible. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting examination on cognitive dissonance as well, because he finds himself becoming more religious just because he practices. And then he's at a snake handling church in the South, and he feels himself emotionally getting worked up, and he almost becomes a born again Christian. But he's just like, no, I can't do it. This is just, it's too far. I can't explain this to my wife. This is not cool. So it's like, it's an interesting thing, because all of that working yourself up and all the manipulation, it doesn't mean that you don't still have a choice. You still have to say, okay, this is what I want to do. Yeah. Well, it's funny, in my Escher, we were just talking yesterday. We were talking about people being like, well, I feel like I shouldn't feel this way, or I should feel this, like these emotions. Yeah. And it made me think of the Serenity Prayer, and it made me think of AA a lot, because it's like, oh, I shouldn't drink, therefore I won't. It's like, well, how good is that? Oh, I'm sure that will solve your problem. You're an alcoholic. I'm sure just explaining to yourself that drinking would ruin your marriage. Well, you won't drink then. Like, that's not how it works. But it's all the way down into like these systems within yourself, and then all the way up to systems outside yourself. And so this person, the year of living biblically, of like, I'm starting to see the systems outside of myself. I'm starting to see God's hand at work, or a community at work. I mean, you don't have to start just with God. God's like so big that like, I'm almost hesitant to, like, when people are like, show me God. It's like, well, I'll start with like a small, like, what about a community? Can I show you what a community is? And like, like, I'll show, like, suddenly you start caring. I mean, we see it all the time of like, you go to a new school, and all the people at this new school, they all wear jeans instead of slacks, or whatever. I used to go to a school with a uniform, and we all wore slacks, and now everyone wears ripped jeans. One day you go to school, and suddenly you look down and you're wearing ripped jeans. How did this happen? How could this have possibly happened? It's like, well, the community influenced you, and in the same way, like, oh, I started wearing these clothes, going to these events, going to church. How did this happen? It's like, well, you started participating in that level. So yeah, exactly. Like, it doesn't surprise me that someone starts doing the things at a small level and starts experiencing, seeing these larger things, start seeing God at a larger level.
I spent a long time outside, unchurched, between my born again experience in a Southern Baptist church in my adolescence to my would be my late 50s, I guess. There was a lot of stuff happened in between. And, when I came back to the church, the question wasn't about where did I feel I could find God in any of the churches. I found God in all the churches. I couldn't walk into a room and not say, oh, wow, this is great. They're experiencing the Lord. This is fantastic. So it was for me, finding a place to plant myself when it came down to it, it basically needed God saying, go there. I had a strong impression, go there. And that was it. And as far as methods go, I'd love to find out what Paul thinks my method is. Come to Jesus via Tibetan Lama. I don't know. But I think I'm actually trying to voice support for Alan's point in a roundabout way. Of course, now people may say that it could be completely invalidated by some people's theology, because, of course, from the view of many people, those Tibetan lamas are demonic. So, I got saved via the devil.
I didn't even know they had lamas in Tibet, but that's great that they talk to you about Jesus.
They do. It's just like Balaam's ass, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's also, it makes me laugh of like, if we really believe this stuff is true, it's like, well, shouldn't there that wouldn't surprise me that anything can lead you to God. Any experience could lead you to God. I mean, I always laugh of like, people be like, well, things being real, anything good. Oh, well, God did that. And it's like, yeah, that's true. And then people will be like, well, what about all the bad things? It's like, well, yeah, anything you can say is bad will point you to God in that, like, okay, there's not bad, Jordan Peterson makes this point of like, no one who's actively on fire is like, life is meaningless. There's no purpose to life. If you light someone on fire, they very rarely are like, well, I might as well not put it out. So, yeah, it's just all experiences, whether it's in Tibet or anywhere. I'm like, okay, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that could lead you to God.
Well, it's funny. Paul mentioned the House of Wu quite a bit in his video this morning, and it was like, yeah, Ron definitely is more in the boom, conversion experience Christianity, a very conventional, I guess you'd say Pentecostal Methodism. And I'm much more about we're coming from very different points of view, and but we intersect. And because my point of view is just wake up and orient yourself towards Jesus and you'll find him. I mean, wherever you're at, it doesn't, if you're a Catholic, just do it as a Catholic. If you're Presbyterian, do it as a Presbyterian. Chasing after conversion experiences, they might be functional in a very individualistic way. That is, they might move you, they might help you orient, might help make you break through some of your psychological and emotional and historical blocks. But ultimately, it's just, I view is just the woo is Jesus is here and you can experience it, and he will involve himself in your life if you let him. And so that's, but is there a method to it? And is there a form to it? It seems like there's 1,000 methods to it. I mean, everyone wants to say, well, the path is narrow, to the Lord, and, wide is the path, the road to destruction. That's all true. But from a human perspective, it seems like you can practice orienting yourself toward God in a myriad of ways, as this corner testifies to, right? Oh well. I killed the conversation. Sorry, Lance. Good to see you.
No, you didn't. I was just being quiet to I talked enough. I was just trying to make sure you guys had a chance to say what you have to say. And God is everywhere present, filling all things. I also participate in 12-step recovery groups where they don't tell you who God is, and you just go on, you seek a God of your own understanding, right? And that's all we can really ever have anyway, right? I participate weekly in a group where the God of people's own understanding is wide and roomy and everything else. And I see it working. Like, I actually see people with transforms lives, right? And, the biggest thing, and Chad was mentioning this, which is about formation versus, what was it? Formation, what was the other word? You remember, Alan, you're smart. He was saying formation versus, was it propaganda or what was it? I can't remember what it was. And Sherry's mentioned this, like, we're all on this journey, right? That's really what we are. Everything is a process, right? At least I would just say the experience that I've had. And here I want to still, man, I have not been in, me personally, although I'm shocked to hear people say discipleship wasn't a big part of any Protestant church or Protestant movement they were a part of. Every single one I've been a part of dealt with formation, because they understood the journey's hard. Like, so the journey's hard, right? Like, life is just hard, and the Christian, like, life is hard, and then the journey is hard, and the whole thing is to try and get you, get into the community, so now you can withstand the storms of life, and you have people who have your back. and those sorts of things. And so I think we're all on our journey. Where we're at. We're God seekers. I think that's really, like, if I would just say, I've heard that mentioned about 12-step groups, but I think one of the things for most people that are here, I think, would you guys agree that a lot of people are seeking God, are God seekers? If you come to this little corner, whether it be Hezi and Jacob or David, right? I think to some extent, for the most part, most people are here because they're seeking God in their lives in some way, right?
Well, so for me, I find it incredibly interesting. Like, I don't know about the word seeking. I just find it interesting to have any kind of conversation about mythological stories, religious foundations. All that stuff is incredibly interesting. And I don't know how to make other people interested in it. And so one of the things that has attracted me here is other people who are interested and want to talk about the thing. Because one of my experiences is like an experience that I think back on a whole bunch is I was at this party with my theater friends. A lot of people are drinking. And this one guy is grabbing beer from the fridge. And this girl asks me an inherently philosophical question, right? Because I love talking philosophy. So she asked me a question that can only be answered philosophically. And this guy who's grabbing beer does not want to hear me talk philosophy. So when she hears, when he hears her ask me this question, he smacks his beer on the counter for 1 second and just goes, "Fuck," and then rushes out before he has to put up with a single second of listening to anyone talking anything philosophical. Is that there's so many instances where people are anti-interested. It's like, I need to push away from this thing. So to be in a situation with y'all fine folk who want to talk about these things that I find particularly interesting, even if you disagree with me. Like, I had a long conversation with Yon God, and I was enjoying myself. Even like atheistic, whatever. If you're interested in these topics, I'd love to have a conversation with you.
A big part of the journey too can be going through stages where you realize the God of your understanding is an idol, or you could say dead, and then you go through these dark periods or these deconstructed periods where you seek and you get somehow revitalized and come back to faith. And you may do this several times in your lifetime. And having permission to do that, which I think the corner is getting there, I think it's okay. You've got it. Otherwise, what happens is everyone gets stuck. Some people get stuck in their adolescent conversion experience, and they're there for 50 years. And they may die that way, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine to be stuck. God can work through stuck. But a lot of people, particularly in this day and age, because we have so much data and our pluralistic experience in society and the internet and everything else, we're just flooded with the information and alternatives. And so, as we go, some people will deconstruct and get stuck in their atheism. And I'm less inclined to say that's okay, because that's kind of sad. Because you die with the expectation of nothing. Well, okay, enjoy your nothing. But I think I said it. I don't need to add to it.
I have a question. how am I the TLC's Pee Wee Herman? That has come up in the chat. David is the TLC Pee Wee Herman in a red tie. I don't even know what that's getting at.
I don't know, Prester John. I can see I've just seen there's a lot of comments back and forth. Again, I put Young God's in here. I like it. But it seems like he's going back and forth with quite a few people in
You offended somebody for something, David, and they were trolling my chat a day or two ago, and I couldn't figure out what the beef was.
Yeah.
I just said, this is not the David I know. The David I know seems quite open and nice and friendly and not racist at all. And they were on a rant, and I don't know what you did to somebody, but praise the Lord.
They said I was racist.
Something like that. Yeah, kind of weird, isn't it? And it was really weird.
Against which race? I hope it was like super specific. It was like just Armenians or
blonde like Nordic women. You like them too much. No, that's racist too, right? What is it?
What's happening right now? I don't even understand. Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, I don't know what that's about. Sorry. Bye, guys. I got to hit the road. I'm going to Sacramento, PVK. I'm going to make a pilgrimage to Living Stones, whether you're there or not. And I kiss the stucco or something, make oblations, and then watch the road sawed off my car. See you guys. Have a good day.
See you, Mark. All right. Wait a minute. Oh, Paul's there. He's going to see him. Hezi might be trying to find his way in. Yeah, and I do want to come back. So Paul, it started on the emerging conversation. Sam made the point that he felt like that moment, the kind of conversion moment, kind of focus of some aspects might be going away. Paul did the homeroom here today. What I do want to say is, and I feel like you always have to say this, but it like goes without saying, it's not as if that people who've had those moments, that's a bad thing. It's also not as if people haven't had those moments and then gone on into deeply practiced the Christianity and had transformed lives and so on and so forth. I do think what we're trying to look at, though, in terms of looking at all these deconstruction stories, looking at the numbers of people that have been leaving the church for a while now, we look at the response that people have had to try, because really, what's the response? What was the emergent, so we bring back to this conversation. Why was there an emergent church? Well, they were trying to respond to the fact that people, like the nuns, Nathan Jacobs, that people are leaving in droves. And then we have this modernity thing going on and everything we're experiencing, society, and we've got all these things, is kind of putting a fine point on where are we at, and are we moving into something that's going to require something else than that response. Here's Hezi. Good morning to Hezi.
Hello.
Or good evening to Hezi.
Good evening. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I hope all you guys are doing well. Bravo, David, on your performance last week. Whole crew. Very nice, very nice. You said something, and also Lance said something that made me think of a conversation I had this morning. Bear with me for 2 minutes as I lay it out. I've mentioned this here and there, that I moved to this new neighborhood, and we're dealing with different elements of community building, definitely also, or specifically when dealing with different different people from different denominations is the wrong word, but different different views, so to speak, of how they want to express their religiosity in Judaism. And I saw specifically this is focused on the role of women, different waves of feminism that are that need to be considered in Judaism, and ultimately how that manifests on the ground, like from a legal perspective. Also, can they participate in the quorum? Are they reading from the Torah, etc., etc.? 1 second, I'm just gonna park the car for a second. And I saw a friend of mine who's on, let's say, the more progressive side, and she was walking in the evening with this book, which basically it's a training book for how to read the Torah in the traditional cadence, and which is usually done traditionally by men. And I saw her, and I was thinking about it for the last few weeks, and I called her this morning, and I told her that I'm going to talk about I'm letting you guys know I'm getting into like heavy Kabbalistic stuff. We don't have to double click on them right now. Just assume I'm not making stuff up. But I mentioned to her that there's a very big concern, and I was talking to some of the men in the community. There's a very big concern from this change. And I mentioned how many of the men here, which are very wise and very learned, nevertheless, have not yet realized or tapped into the teachings and the realization that we have removed ourselves now from exile, from the very technical, logical, masculine manifestation of Judaism, and we are now in a transformation of the feminine return to the land. Also, how we look at the Shekhinah. If the halacha and the law is static, we are now moving towards something that's more fluid. Now, that is obviously very, very scary. That could be very, very wild, and this relates to like the wild Christianity. But part of this is that even if there is literature and about these topics, it hasn't been practiced for thousands of years. And to bring it to a community, it's very, very difficult for them even to conceptualize or we'll call prophesize or imagine how something like that would even look. And even for those, and I was mentioning to her, even for those who want change, first of all, I told her that seeing you walk at night to me is beautiful because I see it's this manifestation of this change, this wanting to really raise the crown on top of the head. This is referring to from Song of Songs, a verse over there, but realizing that we want to crown the imaginary and the spiritual or the feminine on top of the masculine and sort of have a fusion there. And you could map this onto also Genesis and the curses that befall onto man and woman after the fall and the rise of the three waves of feminism. But we need to realize that we are very nervous about these changes, and that doesn't mean we necessarily have to decide right away how this affects the legalese. Like, it doesn't mean that tomorrow this person's daughter is going to be the cantor. What it does mean, though, and what it does require, and this has to do with the fear or that we talk about in the TLC, is it's a conversation in motion, and we have to understand how these changes are happening. And it's very hard to notice when you're in the middle of that change, but because of social media and because of the fact that we could be having this constant dialogue, we are aware of this change, and it almost makes us feel uncomfortable because what do you do? And obviously in Senate, PVK was dealing with this on the ground, like he's seeing these changes happen, and we have to realize how to on one hand be sensitive and realize that the things people are pushing for may indeed come to fruition and be ideal in the next 20, 30, 40 years. If we just resist, then it could transform into something horrible. However, if we realize how to listen carefully and potentially understand that this is a blessed change, then we could transform into something glorious. So in the TLC specifically, it has allowed for a space for these conversations to happen and for people to actually think about these things without the pressure of making a decision, right? Because no one, like, if Paul's not your pastor and I don't owe him anything, so to speak, I don't necessarily have skin in the game yet. And this is the drawing board or the sandbox or where these things can happen. But ideally, Lance and Alan and David leave this table, and then when they go back to their community, they are better equipped to handle this tension. And I'm sorry for that long rant. That's it.
I think it's great.
Well, I'm sorry. I mean, you're right, Chezi. And one of the thousands of videos I haven't made is it was little indicated by the video where I talked about, the Catholic YouTubers doing more formation than any local Catholic priest. If you look at Trent or Pints with Aquinas, it's basically the Beth Moore blogging thing at another level, where Beth Moore as a woman, had way more influence than thousands of Southern Baptist ministers, even though in the Southern Baptist Convention, a woman can't, be clergy, but she has way more influence. And so, we're really, again, to me, Luke 5, there's this amazing passage about wineskins. And it's so amazingly ambiguous what Jesus does when he's wrestling with these things. And what you're pointing to is, again, the problem with wineskins. And I think, in the Christian Reformed Church, so the church arrived at a negotiated settlement of the local option for women in ministry. But now there's, again, a reassessment and says, okay, well, how does this work? Because just equal, same. Well, that's not quite right. So where exactly does this go? And I see the same thing happening when Annie Crawford holds a class on the symbolic world. Again, the symbolic world is, Jonathan Pageau has way more influence than possibly any Orthodox clergy in America. And people might say, well, he's blessed by his priest. Well, wonderful. I'm glad he's blessed by his priest. I have no problem with what Jonathan Pageau is doing. But in terms of how we conceptualize structures and institutions and organizations, these things aren't nothing. And I would say that, just looking at, let's say, the Virgin Mary, how much influence does Mary have? She might less than Peter, perhaps less than Paul, but maybe fourth. Jesus, Paul, Peter, or Jesus, Peter, Paul, and then Mary. Yeah, I know the group. So we're wrestling with embodiment. And so how is both the specific difference of male and female, masculine and feminine, embodied in the church? And I think Protestants, it's interesting that Catholics don't have women clergy, Orthodox don't have women clergy, Protestants have women clergy, but Protestants don't really have Mary. So I can't speak to the Jewish context, but we're all wrestling with these tensions that are here in creation.
Well, and Paul, this is something you can delete this off your channel if you don't want. But one of the things, so anybody who's watched the dynamics in the United States over the decline of the church, right? And it really started to fall off the cliff. It started in the 70s, right, Paul? It started in the 70s, and we've seen this decline, and it's been accelerating. Now, this doesn't mean cause and effect, but we start embracing more of these new liturgies, Jesus movement, into kind of all those sorts of things. But also when you can start to see women's ordination coming in. Now, was that part of it? I don't know, but you can't say it isn't either, right? Like to automatically say, well, because I think what Pageau's talking about, and when we think about this, is once we start breaking these hierarchies, and I think that's their hierarchies in these roles, right? And we see feminism come up in 70s. So now we start breaking these hierarchies. It's like Chesterton's fence. It's like, well, we don't like this fence. Let's tear it down, instead of really trying to think about it more broadly historically. And if you will hear this, you'll hear, I believe Father DeYoung said, I've heard lots of Orthodox priests say that the most powerful people, and I've been attending a Greek Orthodox church, the most powerful people are the yayas, the Greek faithful grandmothers. If there's a priest or whatever comes in and steps out of line, you know who the ones that are going to get him in line real quick? It's the faithful women that will do that. In addition, when we think about women in the home and mothers, my mom was mostly a stay-at-home mom, and my dad, had this stuff. I'm going to tell you who ran our house, Paul, who had more about our formation and everything else. It was my mom. Like, there's great power, like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, that role in terms of value and, quite frankly, power in formation. And so I know it's dangerous to talk about that, but I've been ruminating and thinking about in the United States. And, so I've been thinking about, were the boomers basically given a bad hand that modernity was going to ultimately come to its ultimate formation and the church was going to collapse because of that? Were there things that we did and then we continued to do, changing structures and tearing down fences, that accelerated that? We don't know, but we also can't. We have to put that on the table, right? And so, as Hezi brought in, and we thought about that, like, we have to just take a step back. And I know you mentioned on Synod where as soon as that decision was made, you could never talk about it again, right? Like, we've made this decision, can't talk about it. Like, so Minn Kota, is it Minn Kota that always comes together at the beginning of the Synod and makes their objection or whatever? And I get that, but I think that's part of the larger conversations. There are third rails, I think, now, and regardless of what you want to say, since November, we're able to start having some of these conversations. I even think more societally now. I think there's been a bit of the cancel culture that's been some of the tyranny stuff that people are feeling free to step back to maybe look at a more common sense. So I think we have that moment. But I think within the church, like as Hezi talked about that, I think we need to step back and look at that. And I know that's a third rail you shouldn't be touching, particularly in certain Protestant circles. But but I don't know. I'm not saying that's the case, Paul. You know what I mean? But it's what's causation? What's correlation?
Well, go ahead. Go ahead, Alan.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, Paul. Well, one thing I want to point out is if there's anything going on here, I would say the normative state for many people is that there are no barriers. There's no walls, no separation, no hierarchy. If you want to be a corporate person and go to your job, they'll call you whatever you want to call that. You want them to call you. Like, you can go home, you can smoke as much weed as you want, you can look at all the porn you want. Like, there are no barriers. Like, you could have polygamy, whatever you want. So the idea that, like, oh, well, the institutions are the problem. It's like, well, I think what we're seeing here is that people are running towards institutions. So immediately to be like, well, yes, they need to be updated and everything. But I think before, there's always this call for like reformation and change and updating. But it's like, well, when we look at the place that people seem to be moving away from towards the corner in this way station that we have here in the TLC, it seems like a lot of people are coming away from as much, weed and video games as you want. The weed and video game Golden Corral all you can eat buffet seems to have a problem. And so instead of just saying like, well, we're just going to rip down all the fences, like, maybe we should be careful because we kind of have that. If universal basic income, weed and video games really is on the horizon. And I don't think that's the way forward. And I'm not saying everyone's directly saying that, but I'm saying that, this whole like, well, it's all backwards and old and it's time for it to come down. Like, I'm very hesitant about that because it does seem to just slide back into, well, why do I follow anything? Why do I have to even show up to church? Why do I have to do anything? Anybody can do anything. I'm going to go to Livingstone's and I'll be the pastor on Sunday, Sit down, PVK. I'm the pastor today. Like, and if you don't let me be the pastor, well, that's just because you're backwards and old school. It's like, okay, well, then we're just back to weed and video games land.
I think you're capturing something there, and it's a thread that seems like it's present throughout this whole conversation, whether it's Metagelical or this other. I wish I knew the name of the playwright guy that was speaking earlier. Where the guy didn't want him to speak philosophy. There's this quote. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of this lady named Nora Bateson, but she's got this quote. She says that part of the way she assesses her relationships is she says, "Who can I be when I'm with you?" And for people to introspect, they are influencing others in that regard. And I think this is a question that it's part of the reason why this corner is so awesome. There's conversations we can have here. There's a way I can be that I'm longing to be in other places that just isn't allowed. And so I think churches, freedom. Oh boy, can you guys see me? You guys all blinked out on me.
Yeah,
Anyway,
you cut out for a minute, but
so the idea of freedom being those enabling constraints. So whether it's our formation, whatever that is, support, what is it that we're enabling each other to be in a positive, freeing, enabling way here that even can be translated into the fellowship? I don't know, but it's something that I'm longing to explore.
Can I just really quickly say something, Lance? I just glanced at the comments. I was heading out the door, and Phlebas is under the impression I was judging everyone in the corner, and I don't know what I said to make anybody think I'm judging. I'm sorry if I did that. My perspective is generally that we're all stuck in our various places, and God is at work trying to unstick us, and that it's a progressive process. Is that what I did? Was that offensive? Help me out, guys, real quick. If that was, I want to be a good player here, and I didn't mean to cause offense.
Phlebas is a big boy. You don't have to worry about hurting him. He's fine.
Well, I just want to make sure everybody else is cool too, because if everybody got that vibe, man, it's like I was like, wow, some demons that were messing with the signal.
The key, I think it's often lost that one of the key things about what we have going here is that we know each other. And in knowing each other, we have expectations of each other. And the more we get to know each other, the rougher we can play. And again, as Chezi keeps saying, this is not a safe space, it's a brave space. And the way we grow in courage is we get to know each other better. And so when I say something that offends someone, and I do all the time, or when I hit a nerve that is sort of sensitive, or when I step on a landmine, we talk about it. And that's why, of course, Lance, with you pushing back on women's ordination in church, I got to quick drop this from my channel because, boy, everything that's on Paul's channel is only according to what Paul thinks is within the box. That's why, we learned on Sunday with our council meeting that the Livingstone's most effective outreach strategy is the Freddie and Paul show. So, there you go, evangelicals. You want an outreach strategy, you just go ahead and try to replicate the Freddie and Paul show. So, Mark, if you're in church on Sunday, make sure you get there at 9 o'clock for estuary so the other Livingstoners can get to know you. But also stay, and we'll get you on the Freddie and Paul show. You just have to, if you really want to get on, you got to bring Freddie a gift. And bringing Freddie a gift will get you on the Freddie and Paul show. Trust me.
I'm going to be passing through in like 3 hours. 2.5, 3 hours. So I'm going to miss the Sunday and Freddie Paul show. It breaks my heart, but I will make another trip up if I get a chance to be on the Freddie Paul show, you bet I'll be on it. So, all
right.
We'll bring Freddie a gift. I will most definitely bring him
Christian
an
Reformed
offering.
evangelism right now. I'm waiting for other churches to try to copy it.
Well, what the draw on that, Paul, is that what you see are real people. Like that's why that's a draw. It's why my wife, and I'm sorry to say this, Paul, she prefers we watch the Freddie and Paul show together, and that's probably the only content she really likes in this side of the little corner. Because she does all the stuff we talk about, she doesn't need it, right? It's just like, what is that? Too many strands in my head. But she loved Fancy Nancy, and she just loved it was just real human beings having fun. And I always love, because I still watch most of your rough drafts the Sundays, and then used to tune in, but then I'm always amazed to see what Nancy got out of your sermons too. By the way. which is part of the deal. Which, by the way, she got nuggets. I'm telling you, she found some nuggets that were there, but it was always fun to see that. So I think, and so what is the Freddie and Paul show? It's a lot like what we're doing here. What is it? Real human beings having real conversations, being them, hopefully trying to be themselves, right?
This topic, I had to speed listen through Paul's video and the beginning of this because I wanted to make sure nobody else already hit this stuff. But this is like the main thing that I've been studying for like most of my life, essentially. And I think the way to think that the conversionary experience thing is going away is a pretty blind. We have a blind spot there because we're all of the upper middle class, thinky talky, got our life together variety of people. Like, so most of my career in ministry was in Assemblies of God Church, and I was like the weird oddball there. Even when I went to ministry school, it was like I had my head screwed on too tight they didn't know what to do with me. Like, because there was always people who were coming in whose life was a mess, and so if you think about these poorer socioeconomic areas, that's where this gospel message still is moving in that way. And I think really we need to have this both and thing. The conversion experience is kind of the miraculous innovation of Christianity. But in those early years, what did people think they were converting to? They thought they were converting to like Judaism, which is the most cultural of religions. It's all about, you're born into it. But so so there was probably a big difference between the Jewish believers who have come and accept that Jesus is the Messiah, and then a guy like Cornelius, who as the pedo Baptists love to say, it was his household that was baptized. So, and there was infants in there, but he was going to have a lot of different questions about what do you do with these infants in the household now that we've all joined this religion. Like, he had to answer a totally different kind of thing. And so, and what I noticed is like so like in a Pentecostal church, Assemblies of God, they will always say everything with the spiritual language. Everything that happens is the Spirit. But once you have your moment, if your life is a wreck, people are going to come and be helping you in very practical cultural ways. Here's how you balance a checkbook. Here's how you stop fighting with your wife all the time. Here's how you need to parent your kids and all that stuff. And it's almost like they're not recognizing it, that's what's happening. And it is deeply spiritual, but it's applied in this cultural context. Which, I think that's probably, we're ignorant to how often our churches are divided along those lines. And when you are in a church that has a diverse strata along those socioeconomic lines, that's a really rare and amazing thing, where you can have people worshiping together in that way. And it's different from just money, because if Pentecostal people get rich, they just turn into prosperity gospel people. They don't learn how to. They haven't figured out the culture of like wisdom with that stuff. So anyway, it's good to have to be metagelical, because we need both of these. And maybe it's just churches and pastors need to be a little bit more open about saying, we've noticed that you're not doing well, young teenager. Perhaps you should go down to this Anglican church down the street or something and learn something new, So, I don't know.
What does metagelical mean?
Paul?
Evangelicals broke down the walls between Protestant churches and innovated a new way to do mission and community. Those walls are now breaking down between the Protestants and the Catholics and the Orthodox.
that the Orthodox and the Catholics are being, at least in America, becoming more like evangelicals, and the Protestants and evangelicals are becoming more like Orthodox and Catholics. And the body of Christ is breaking down the walls and learning from each other and growing together. Andrew, where's your bowl of cereal?
I just woke up, and plus, like, there's no good cereal here. It's all like wheat thins. What am I supposed to do with that? You know, like.
We need to start a GoFundMe, Captain Crunch for Andrew T. Or what's your favorite cereal, Andrew?
Honey Nut Cheerios.
Yeah. Honey Nut Cheerios for Andrew T. Okay. So please send. Put your address in there, and we'll have to DoorDash you some Honey Nut Cheerios. That's right.
All right. Well, I've got to jump off for a meeting here in about 10 minutes. So if people want to, unless Kyle, if you want to continue to jump in here to keep this going, I know you have the ability to do that. Otherwise, if people want to have their final words, and so I'll have mine right now, and then I'll be quiet and let people do this. Sam said something. It struck a chord with you, Paul. It struck a chord with me. It struck a chord with Andrew. You did a homeroom today on that. We're not saying that the conversion moment, that stuff isn't happen, or low church isn't going to exist, or those things aren't real. Actually, if you talk to a lot of people, there was a lot that led up to that moment. Like there's years or whatever, we're going to say that. However, there does appear to be people recognizing, people who are doing church, that something's changing. And as the emergent church saw that, they're moving towards realizing people are looking for something. It would appear as if you're doing church and you're not realizing the people that are going to show up on your doorstep are looking for something more solid. I don't know what the right word, I'm searching for them, Paul, whatever, something like that. It's happening. Like if you can talk to Lutherans and Orthodox, and we're seeing it here or whatever, something's happening. And so I do think I do think that what we're doing is we're observing it and trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I'll end my stream at the top of the hour too. I got to open up the church for the Bible study ladies, and but yeah, something is happening, and I guess what I wanted to do in homeroom was flesh out a little bit more about Sam's observation. But all of these observations, as Michael just made, all of these are in context, and Michael's right. It's sort of well-educated. Even if you look at the corner, we're dominated by, not exclusively, we're dominated by well-educated, doing okay. We've got some people who, have sort of Chad and his 12 steppers, have given us some credibility down in the lower ranks, but we're, again, part of the whole emergent movement observation that my aha moment a couple of weeks ago was, we have sort of picked up where the emergent movement left off. And I thought CW's observations about, did the emergent movement really go away or fail? Because, those to the left sort of bolstered the main line. I'm sure the main line was super happy to have them. The Calvinists sort of reinvigorated a bunch of historically sort of wobbling Calvinist denominations like the Christian Reformed Church, and a whole bunch that's sort of deconstructed. Now they've gone into strengthening the Orthodox and the traditional Catholics. So, it sort of went to seed, but those seeds have sprouted, and those sproutings have strengthened the various different elements of the North American church. And I think part of what the corner is doing is very much in continuity with that. But, Cale, I should make a video. Cale asked a great question in one of the videos. He said, Paul, why didn't you deconstruct like a lot of the emergents? Because I was very much going in an emergent trajectory. And then basically I took a turn much more towards Tim Keller. So I took a turn towards Young, Restless, and Reformed. Now, many will look at me and say I'm not purely Young, Restless, and Reformed because of a variety of my views. But but I didn't go mainline. I didn't go Young, Restless, and Reformed. I haven't gone Orthodox. I've stayed Christian Reformed. But I think that's sort of part of CW's point in that video, which was the emergent movement wasn't fruitless. So
I wonder if that whole thing is almost like some of a result of, the older generation of boomers going into these places, planting these churches, and essentially they had the success and it transformed the culture, because then all these pastors' kids are growing up in the suburbs and they're hearing their parents preach this gospel that's really aimed at wicked people that don't have their life together, and that's some of the disconnect even that I experienced, not so much in my parents' church, but in the church that I attended a lot as a teenager. Was like, where's the wickedness and the evil? Oh, it's like, and then you just start looking at it, you're projecting it onto yourself, and that's where you get all that guilt that is not really appropriate, and it was a lot of just artsy suburban yuppies.
Well, so what happened with Methodism over the long run was it sort of initiated some purity spirals in some people. And a big part of what the emerging church movement was addressing some of those purity spirals. Even Nadia Bolz-Weber and her little vagina cast out of the purity rings. I mean, talk about an embodiment of dealing with purity spirals. And the truth is that a lot of older denominations, like the Orthodox, when I listen to Orthodox priests talk shop in terms of pastoral care, you can hear that orthodoxy, a lot of Orthodox priests have a lot of inherited wisdom whereby they recognize a purity spiral when they see one. My conversation with John Heers about, he got married at the wrong time of year, and then he was really looking forward to having a great sex life with his wife, and they went into a fasting, season in the Orthodox church, and he's like, what am I going to do? And the priest is like, you're looking for a dispensation to relieve you of fasting, not having, glorious lovemaking with your wife. No, I'm not going to give you that dispensation, but if you're going to have sex with your wife, have sex with your wife. But even there is, pulling back from a purity spiral, but others who are super into Orthodox rigor are going to say, how dare the priest say that to him? So and so I'm preaching on the Sermon on the Plain now this week, which is one of the more rigorous statements of Jesus, but it establishes an ideal that just keeps pulling us. And there's, and what happens in the church is that the whole body of church embodies all of those tensions. And you have to somehow navigate between your purity spirals and your complete nominalism. And the church is able to do that and has been for centuries.
This is so cool, and it's why I appreciate you, Paul, so much. I remember when we did our little one-on-one talk way back in the day, I was just thanking you so much for sort of implicitly giving me permission to have the thoughts that I was thinking. And I think the estuary is a similar place where a friend of mine once told me, you don't understand the sort of the principle of something until you kind of go off the edge. And so we identify, we find the boundaries of what defines a faith, or perhaps even where the limits of our own understanding are, when we are outside it, or so near the edge that we're like, oh, there's the edge. And I respect and honor that there are places where that's not the purpose. The purpose is to focus on the core of what is it? How do you define the container that's defined by what it's containing versus what the boundaries of it are? Anyway, that I really love this environment because it allows security within this implicit we're together in this, whatever this is. Um, Loosely around Christianity or some kind of love one another ethic that also allows us to respect each other's container, um, and I don't know what that says about the church, but I think that it's kind of in a most denominations or sects or bodies have kind of shot themselves in the foot by implying that if you even suggest that you are curious about where the edges be, you're a threat.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, and this is where, this is where faith comes in. And I know it through my Calvinism, because and again, I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to make other traditions feel less than, but for me, in my Calvinism, what isn't so important is my grip on God, but what's really important is God's grip on me. And at least my tradition really emphasizes that, finally, it's not my ability to hang on, it's God's ability to hang on. And I have more confidence in his grip strength than in mine. So, and I'm not saying other traditions don't say that, but for me, that, and if that then gives you a confidence to say, okay, that God might bring me to extremities. Look at what he does to his prophets. Look at what he does to his apostles. Look at what he does. God's favorite tools, just like with any workshop, if you have something really hard you need to do, you grab your favorite tool and you push that tool to its limit. And that's what God does. And so I think cowardice is a real problem in a church in an affluent world. And that's why we see monastic movements break out. That's why St. Anthony goes to the desert. That's why the call of the Sermon on the Plain is wrenching someone like Paul Kingsnorth when he gives his Erasmus lecture. And it's a cry in the desert. How should I live? I want to be pure. And, the Gadarene demoniac, is liberated by Jesus. And all he says is, I want to be with you, Jesus. And Jesus says, go back to your family. And it's like, and tell them what God has done for you. And it's like, for him, that is the most enormous self-denial possible, when all I want to do is be with this man who rescued me. And Jesus says, no, you go be with your family and tell them what God has done and live your life. Have a wife, have children, have a job, live the life I've given you. That's so radical.
I think about that in the conversion experience necessary to take somebody who's really deep into homelessness or some kind of agoraphobia. There's something about going to a completely different way that is more appealing than just taking on the burden of regular workaday life.
It is to be a normie, to be a Christian normie, is often very difficult. There are, and you'll find the saints and the monks say this too, and to be a monk in the desert without a family, without a job, yeah, there are certain challenges to that. But to be a Christian with a family and a job, and to have to vote, and to, it's really hard. You can't afford a purity spiral. You're going to have compromises. You're going to hear Jesus call to the wilderness, and it's going to test your soul. So, the path is narrow.
And to echo that, Paul, I think we all have Father DeYoung had a conversation with Pajot, and he's coming out with Paul the Pharisee, which is going to be really interesting. He's talking about that context. And the fact of the matter is we all have these specific calls. And one of the things, I can't remember which saint, I'll try and figure that up and share it. But basically he talked about a faithful woman taking care of her family is worth 1,000 prayers in a monastery. Okay? Because that's hard, right? And so what you just talked about, which is, some people are called to be monk, but you obviously aren't. So you're here, and by the way, your struggle is seen by God as worthy and valuable, and that's hard. And so go live your life lovingly, day to day, moment to moment, with a God consciousness or whatever. And whatever you do it under the Lord. I mean, it's that's that thing that I think crosses. That's very metagenical, but like when you say that's Calvinism, I would say that's mere Christianity, right? And so you see those things. So I think that's a good call to all of us we talk about these things, but go be a good son, daughter, husband, parent, worker, whatever you need to do today. And we'll continue this conversation. I've got to jump on to a meeting here. So anyway, thanks thanks Sam first, and then Alex, and then your homeroom. And I'm just interested in this stuff. I'm a church nerd. I followed this. I like seeing how that played out in society. And so I appreciate everyone for coming in and joining in this conversation.
All right. Thank you all. Take care.
Go ahead, Michael. We got 1 minute.
Okay. I could use all of your prayers because we just found out baby number 4 is coming. And I need to sell some books.
Congratulations.
So
may it be a
Thank
male
you.
child. You've got 3 girls, right?
Yeah. Whatever. I mean, that's going to be more of a learning curve, but we'll see. It's whatever God's will is.
All right. Wonderful, Michael. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.